everyone, and welcome back to the Scholar AI Founders Pod. Make sure you find us on all the typical podcast locations and find us on our YouTube channel. Shashi, Lakshay, it's nice to be back with you all. We missed last week, so excited to be back. Everyone, remember, please put your comments in the sections below, and we'll get to them in some upcoming episodes. So, Lakshay, it's been a pretty big week in the world of AI. GPT-4, Google both had some recent announcements. Let's start with OpenAI and their GPT-4 Omni model. So I'm going to pause and let you react to that kind of in any way you want. I know you got to play around with it a little bit, so why don't you just share your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think the demo really impressive. I think when I look at what GPT-4 Omni is, like it's a consumer-oriented launch. Like we've seen stuff like Sora, we've seen stuff like Turbo come out, where the main value is in like the Turbo and the evals. But I think to me, this is the first thing in a while that ChatGPT has launched that says like, hey, you are the general user of AI products. You exist in the world. Like, you know what ChatGPT is. Like, here's the next level. I think it's a model and like, I guess maybe a platform built with a lot of the learnings they've had from GPTs, the learnings they've had from plugins, and just like what people have built on these tools to make a newer product. I think one thing that's pretty interesting is obviously like it's multimodal by design. But in general, people are finding that even for like textual reasoning, etc., it's better than Turbo is in a lot of cases, even for like coding or long form drafting. One case I saw on Twitter is people using Turbo versus Omni for writing academic papers or writing like academic, like long form content. And in that case, like it seemed that Omni did like a way, way, way better job. It'll be, I think the most interesting part of this demo is seeing what these like, what happens to OpenAI as like a product company. Because to me, like that demo that they did earlier this week was like, felt like a very, very big step in OpenAI declaring we are a consumer company that's meant to be used by the layperson, not a research company providing for developers. And those are two very different things, especially when you look at like what OpenAI's mission is, et cetera. I think there's a lot to read into when you look at like a lot of the resignations and stuff that are happening in OpenAI, but a lot of that's kind of speculation.
Yeah, those are all
The
good points.
Falcon video. Have you seen the tutoring example on Twitter? I thought that was really interesting and compelling, and tease up use cases to bridge off of what you're saying, Akshay, about a consumer-oriented company. It feels like there's still a gap there, a gap that Falcon can bridge himself, but there's still kind of a usability gap, at least in my mind, that will bring the tool and what the tool can do more directly and conveniently into the hands of most end consumers. And the question in my mind is that the gap that OpenAI focuses on closing, that UI usability gap? Or does OpenAI focus on providing that underlying framework for people who are advanced users to use directly, but in many cases most users will need supporting infrastructure in between to just make the use really easy, simple, convenient. I imagine, for example, in that education use case, someone might build on top of GPT-4o to make an education-specific app that would do all of that kind of prompting work in the background for you, so you don't really need to know how to do a good job prompting.
Yeah, I think what's interesting to me, like when I look at like when I'm trying to like discern OpenAI's intentions, I guess, like of course they had the mobile app for a while, they've had like the web platform for a while. To me, like more than GPT-4o, the fact that they're making a desktop app that like you can use across your computer, to me is like a very, very big leap towards consumer. I think what ends up happening very realistically is like they kind of, especially with like the Apple deal again in the swath of moves OpenAI made this week, what feels like is kind of happening, like the go-to brain for anything AI related kind of ends up as ChatGPT, like as a product, or rather OpenAI's whatever their hottest like multimodal model ends up being. And what happens from there is like, I think that there are spaces for like infrastructure layers, like in the same way like GPT's plugins exist, like help a user like tailor their use case to what they're doing, right? I didn't know this, but the desktop app can support like GPTs, for example. So someone's like scientific, they might use our GPT in addition to whatever they're doing online, right? I think it's just very, it's really interesting to me that OpenAI, like in the context of the week, if you're to look at what they are doing without the context of like, oh, we're an open source like research company, like where they started, you'd basically assume like this is just like a very hot week for like a consumer tech company. You know, like a very, very busy week for a normal, successful consumer tech company. So we'll see. I think, especially like when I saw the Google Drive and OneDrive thing, my reply to Dame was like, can they chill, please? Like, relax, man. God damn.
There are two thoughts. One from something you said earlier. You said that it's possible, at least in select cases, that GPT-4 Omni will outperform GPT-4 Turbo, even in the kind of creation of these more complex word products. Like I think you said academic papers, but in any event, kind of these more complex writings. I'm curious if you want to speculate a little bit as to why you think that might be. My intuition is that maybe in the combination of the native multimodality when it comes to outputting things that are multimodal by nature, include tabular data, include images, maybe those kind of things. Maybe that's the bridge. But again, I haven't had enough time to really understand this to be able to comment further than that. So would love to hear your reaction to that, yes, no, or anything else.
Yeah, like the underlying like architecture of a lot of these models is like kind of unclear. Like everything I've kind of gathered over time is pretty speculative. My understanding is that Turbo and like a lot of what GPT-4 as like a consumer product was before, it was as a kind of a combination of models kind of strung together manually in that like you have like one model that's text to text, then you have one model that's text to video or text to photo or photo to text, etc. And so you just kind of like multiple translation steps in the center, right? I think they claim, and this has kind of had like mixed labeling, like some people have said different things, but at least in like their original post, like GPT-4o is like multimodal from the ground up. So everything lives in the same embedding space. So you could like maybe speculate that like all these videos that they're training off of, they're using synthetic data from GPT-4 Turbo or something, right? They have videos that describe like, hey, what is the content of this frame or photo or whatever. And once you have that, then all of this output content from GPT-4o, whether it's audio, text, video, they all live in the same embedding space directly rather than needing to be like multiple models speaking in English to one another, right? And just like the amount of training data kind of available to any one of the parts of multimodality is just a lot higher because of that. Speculation. Again, it's kind of unclear if that's like actually true, but that's at least one of the things they said and maybe later contradicted themselves on, but hard to say.
What is the Apple deal? Do we know clearly how OpenAI will integrate with Apple?
I thought it was just like to be like Apple's like on system platform, but let's see.
Yeah, that was my understanding as well.
Power,
What I took
iPhone's
from that,
capabilities.
yeah, what I took from that is it's going to be the large language model that is automatically running on the cloud-based services for the AI on Apple devices, basically. So it's not going to be on device, in my understanding. Maybe it will be eventually with whatever chip Apple releases, but my understanding is that it basically is going to be a Siri replacement in the short term. Think about it like that.
So the consumer will still interact with Siri, but then right behind the Siri interaction will be an OpenAI-driven response. Is that right?
Yeah, speculatively, it seems like just like reading the deal, like it's just like rights to use OpenAI product, like OpenAI and ChatGPT inside of Apple's products and services. You would assume that that's Siri, but it could be a lot of things.
Okay. And who pays who here? Does Apple pay OpenAI or does OpenAI pay Apple?
It's a good question. I don't know that I've seen it. I think you could make the argument that it's business positive for both of them. So yeah, unsure. I also thought like
I asked because in Google's relationship.
But I was going to say the other thing that OpenAI announced in the ocean of announcements they made this week was also that they're going to be pulling Reddit information into theirs, and there was a Reddit deal not long ago with I think Google, if I'm not mistaken, before as well. So I don't know. This entire landscape is getting complex as far as who pays who and who owns what and where it kind of stands. So
in the Google relationship, I believe Google was paying Apple to be the default search engine for a long time. So the direction of cache it's not obvious to me. I wonder how data rights also work, not just cache, but who owns the user data.
Yeah. Data is an interesting concept in this world of AI. Slack's getting publicly flamed a little bit right now for their opt-out strategy.
Yeah.
Basically, like if you sign up for their Slack AI, all of your messages inside of Slack are going to be included in the training data for the AI going forward, unless you specifically opt out, which people were not very thrilled with. So
Yeah, at least looking into the Apple OpenAI one, like all the terminology I'm seeing is like closing in on a deal. It's not clear whatsoever as to who's paying. It feels like over the course of a week, like there's just so many more consumer tech oriented moves that just caught me by surprise. Like Google I/O was like pretty interesting. Like they demoed a lot of like pretty similar stuff, but historically Google's demos have always just been like, here's this hand wavy impressive thing that never ships. Like users will never ever see it, right? And OpenAI, like they ship day of, and it's kind of got Google dancing a little bit. So it'll be interesting to see like what keeping up with OpenAI actually fundamentally looks like, from a company that's historically like pretty low key with what they push out into the world and how users begin using it.
I don't want to speculate too much here, but as you're speaking, Lakshay, one of the things that I'm thinking about is I do wonder if the time to iterate and improve upon the previous best in class foundation model is going to get longer. And what I mean by that is like, I do wonder if what we're seeing is this kind of attention shift to consumer as some latent evidence that building GPT-5, as an example, is harder or more time consuming than maybe they originally anticipated, or just that they didn't know how long it was going to take. And they're discovering it takes a pretty long time to build anything that's actually better than the best in class right now. And then the implication becomes, if the solution for enterprise is the best in class model, they've kind of checked that box and they're already building GPT-5, right? So while building GPT-5 in parallel for the enterprise use case, maybe they're simply saying, we can, with all of our kind of, resources, money, and people, we can build these other things on top of it to make ChatGPT better, faster, cheaper, some combination of those three things to the end user who is not the enterprise payer, right? Who is the, professional or layperson just out in the world using these things on the desktop app or the iPhone app or Android app or otherwise. So again, I don't want to speculate too much about that, but that's kind of what, is in my brain as you're speaking.
Yeah, when folks talk about like all the resignations that are happening from OpenAI, like the two, like, I guess, parties of where people like why people think that's happening is one, like developing like advanced models has plateaued. So the companies become consumer, so people dipped. The other one is obviously the E/ACC attitude of like they found AGI and they don't want it to be Sam Altman, so they're leaving, right? I think just in regards to like way I'm looking at like what it means for models versus consumer is that like I think the one thing I feel like I can very definitively say is that like by opening up so many consumer channels, by making GPT-4o like a multimodal model free to use, they're accepting a very, very high compute cost, and what they're trading back is, as usual, data, right? Like I think in regards to like data space on the web that's interesting, that's why the Red deal has gone through, right? They've covered a very significant portion of it. They've covered YouTube, quote unquote. They've covered like a lot of just like Wikipedia, whatever it may be. And that kind of reaches the point that like users are going to be walking around the world, taking photos of things, recording video of things, talking to the model, saying all sorts of dynamic things that you just wouldn't capture from the internet. And that's beginning to feed into what the next model might be. Like that's the evolution path to get to the next data like tier basically needed to make the models better. Because from what they have right now, like plateau is kind of expected. Like there's only so much information on the internet before you start rehashing yourself.
Did you see any of the Google I/O announcement? What do you think of the timing of the two announcements, and how do you think that positions Google?
Yeah, I feel I can't say this like directly from memory. I feel like this happened before that OpenAI planned like a big demo aligned with Google again. Like this isn't the first time that this has happened. It feels very intentional in that it's just like you're going to notice the person who does it first. Like I doubt people like if you are a layperson that cares about like AI in any sense, I doubt Google I/O is something you got excited for. OpenAI is in common vernacular. If you hear OpenAI launch the multimodal model first, I would assume the influx to OpenAI is like web traffic. was a lot higher than Google's on Google I/O. I also feel like my Twitter of Google I/O is mostly filled with Mark Reble, the improv, like, I don't even know how to describe him. Very funny dude, but it's really funny that like people are taking away from like, oh, look at OpenAI, like a clean, sophisticated company versus Google, this class of clowns. So I don't know. I think like when I look at what Google's doing, like it's just hard for me to say like what is a strategic move from them, what is a good move from them. Just knowing historically that they ship very, very slow, if at all. You know, they've had like the chat voice assistant, like they had like the phone calling assistant like many years ago. That's never manifested, you know? That's something that like if they had done at that time, it'd probably be harder for OpenAI as a consumer product to currently exist. You know, we'd be talking about Gemini as like the model everyone's operating on, but right now the vernacular is ChatGPT.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard a lot of speculation of Sundar's tenure and how maybe time is near the end for him because of the difficulty in managing Google at this stage of change. They were in a very comfortable cash cow position. They were just everything they did just produced cash, and all of the side bets that they did that didn't work out were basically irrelevant with regard to the final cash position of the business. Now you're right. The technical velocity is clearly absent at Google. It's just very hard to move from low technical velocity to high technical velocity, and that's what they're experiencing. It doesn't sound, when you hear interviews with Sundar, it doesn't sound like he has a crisp plan. He doesn't come across as this is our plan, this is how we're going to win. And if I were to suggest to him a pathway, I would say you've got a lot of users on your current incumbent systems. Just make every single one of those much better. And you've got all the tools to do it. So just focus in on that. Don't play the game that OpenAI is playing. Play the game that you can play and you can win on your home territory, which is people using Google Maps, people using Android OS, people using Google Search. Just make all of those, Gmail, make all of those incredible and just accelerate the product quality within each one of those things. And the net effect will be that each of those products will be strengthened and generate more cash and more defensibility. And yes, OpenAI will have successful products, but don't let that be the distraction. You don't have to play on their turf. You can just win on the territory you already have.
I see this playing out as just another example and why being horizontal in this space, even as a company that is as large and flush with cash as Google is very challenging. And what I mean by that is laying the foundation for some baseline level of artificial intelligence, right? Text prediction in the way that these large language models do it seems to be relatively doable by a company. We can release a large language model into the world. This large language model is pretty good at a lot of things, but doing that last mile engineering to make these things really useful for a professional on a day-to-day basis seems to be very hard. And in fact, there's lots of startup companies, and in many ways, we're kind of one of them, working in that space. And even we are finding challenges when we focus on niches, right? Like when you focus on a singular user, trying to build them the framework, trying to build them the infrastructure, trying to build them the systems that they need to accomplish their day-to-day tasks become really challenging. So I think to your point, Shashi, maybe the reason they're not doing it in Gmail and in Google Maps, etc., is because they don't have the bandwidth, maybe, or to go deep enough, or the expertise, or maybe the underlying tech stack just isn't mature enough to actually get there. So I don't know what the action kind of, the takeaways from that are, other than it does feel to me right now that AI is very good at some very basic tasks, but to actually get to the tasks that deliver the real value for people, we still have to cross a chasm. And I think it is unclear to me right now what is needed to kind of cross that chasm and who is the most well positioned to be building those things. So,
yeah, one thing, I mean, so Google Maps, like when you mentioned Google Maps, that's pretty interesting to me, and just like even beginning to think like, what does an evolution of Google Maps look like if you're assuming LLMs are just a base available technology? But at least in regards to kind of the other stuff like the Gmail, the Google Drive, I think one thing that's interesting, and this is just like observing my own behavior, is I've gotten like pop-ups all the time in like my Gmail or my Google Drive saying like, oh, like you can use Gemini or whatever, right? But not even because I like was resisting it, but just because of like user inertia, I was like, oh, that's more stuff in my UI. So I just kind of wiped it away and just went back to using it how I normally do. Like Google is like, in my feeling, like Google is almost so incumbent that the inertia to being a user and using new tech where I'm used to Google stuff being feels a lot higher, weirdly. Like I'm sure like Android's a different story where like people are used to kind of having like search bar, the voice interface, that sort of stuff. But at least like even like putting it into their product suite, like I'm used to going to ChatGPT and exploring for stuff and like adopting new stuff that they're shipping out because that's the pattern they've taught me as a user. Whereas Google, it's like, oh my God, I have like 7 emails today and they're all super long. Wipe away stuff, even though the Gemini thing would probably help me do that. It's just strange. I don't know. Just a weird product user observation, I guess, about myself.
Have you ever seen the adoption curve of Zoom and Microsoft Teams? There was this really interesting, let's see if I can find it. It's a really interesting adoption curve of how Zoom began to get traction and then how Microsoft responded by integrating it into their core offerings. We'll find it and we'll put it up, but it's basically Zoom has market share, and then Microsoft decides to integrate it and basically bundle, and it goes like this. And basically, Microsoft Teams has a significant multiple of usage over Zoom, entirely because of their ability to bundle and integrate. And I would, if I were to advise Sundar, I'd say this is a lesson for you to learn. So let's take Perplexity as an example. Perplexity is an up and coming company that could potentially take market share of search, the most important territory of your company. What could you do? Let's say you're a user who likes Google search exactly as it is in terms of interface. You leave it alone, right? You create another interface and you give it some other, simple name like, /2 or something, some easy accessibility point, and you just make the Perplexity killer, and you just make it much, much better, faster, make the ads more relevant, right? You've already got the audience, and if a user wants an interface like that, just give them that interface with all the power of Google and Gemini and et cetera embedded within it. And by doing that, you cut off all that available territory from being available to the upstart.
Yeah, I think of all the places that Google has tried to do stuff with Gemini, I don't know how you'd measure success in this case beyond just like user engagement with it, but I have been getting like what feels like a very Perplexity style UI when you search for stuff on Google. Like the default is like now it'll be like AI generated response at the very top, like paragraph summary answer, and then like 4 sources, same way Perplexity does. I don't know what the days in their offices currently look like, but I'd imagine it's at least a little bit concerning that Google's just kind of copying the UI they're proving out with all the same tech that they already have.
I think there's a weird dynamic going on right now that is a first for Google in that they don't charge users, right? Like Google Maps as a free service is kind of unfathomable, right? Like it's an excellent service. It's best in the world by a long shot. I guess some people might argue Apple Maps. I would not. Point being, it's a free service for users because they can harvest data and they can, sell that to advertisers on the back end. AI is this kind of first in paradigm introduction in which the actual hosting costs, the kind of cost of goods of this underlying software stack are more expensive than their other ones. And so I do wonder if that kind of puts them at odds of like, how would they actually deliver the best quote unquote free user experience while balancing that with an increase in ad revenue as a direct relationship of these AI tools. And my assumption is they're probably struggling to find that balance, right? They kind of already have saturated the market. They really can't gather any more users than what they already have. Therefore, it's very difficult for them to justify to advertisers why they should spend more to reach the exact same users they're already reaching through these AI tools, right? And then as we've talked about otherwise, this ads driven model in an AI world is different, maybe not good, maybe not bad, but is different, right? How do you provide a very concise, thoughtful AI answer while still delivering ads as your primary source of revenue? So in many ways, I do wonder if there's a little bit of misaligned incentives on Google's behalf on delivering the absolute best technology, like you're outlining, Shashi, and keeping it in line with their core business, which is, at the end of the day, selling ads, right? And so maybe it's the fact that those two things are kind of flying in the face of one another that is giving them this resistance to build the product across the, their kind of ecosystem.
We've talked about consumer as inevitably a path toward advertising. It's very difficult to envision most consumers being willing to pay the marginal cost for a system that could otherwise be delivered for free with ads. Facebook went through this exact process just a few years ago, where users were saying, "Can I have an ad-free experience and pay a monthly membership?" They experimented with that. They found that ultimately they couldn't charge enough on a monthly membership to offset their current advertising revenue. So if you were going to maximize for your financial picture, you would ultimately, as a consumer business, end up with an advertising-based business. I think if OpenAI were anything close to financially break even, they would have to achieve that via a blend of high-cost membership to be ad-free plus an ad-driven model, not dissimilar from Netflix today. And so I think that will be the inevitability. I don't think there is a path to being purely ad-free membership pay and have enough market share. I think you leave too much of the market outside your door.
I agree. I think that in many ways, some of the juxtaposition between OpenAI and Google right now just comes down to the fact that Google is a public company. OpenAI is not, and their incentive structure has to be different because of those dynamics, right? They're kind of, OpenAI is, I think, much more comfortable at this point gaining market share in lieu of profitability or even break even, whereas Google has to keep an eye on the bottom line. Maybe they're okay losing money, but macroeconomic climate being what it is right now, losing money is not looked upon as favorably in the public markets as it has been in years past. And so everybody, Google, Meta, everybody is looking towards ways to drive towards profitability, if not become profitable in the public markets. And I think we're still getting other companies, Perplexity, OpenAI, who can exist in the private space and can afford to burn cash more loosely, I suppose.
To change gears, Damon, you spent the last few days at a conference. Do you want to tell us what you learned?
Yeah, happy to. So that's right. The last 3 days, I was actually at a conference put on by some folks out here in the Research Triangle. So kind of a joint venture between the universities and some biotech and medtech companies out here in North Carolina. And it's fascinating. I think the quickest way that I can summarize is transforming a scientific idea into a commercial enterprise is a very difficult path. And the traditional ways in which we educate scientists and inventors does not necessarily provide them the right foundation to become entrepreneurs themselves, right? So typically we end up matching scientific inventors with business people so they can actually bring those products to life. And in my personal experience, this is no longer me speaking about the conference. This is just me reflecting on my personal thoughts on this. Is far too many scientific ideas die as ideas. They don't actually get to see any translation. They don't actually get to enter the real world. They don't actually get to help people because there's so much kind of complexity and inertia of getting these inventions into these highly regulated industries, whether it be mostly medicine of some kind, right? It's whether this is a new drug or a new medical device or something like that. It's so highly regulated for good reason, obviously. But navigating that is a complex science in and of itself. And we don't necessarily do the best job, I think, of training scientists to navigate that. And so you have to have this marriage of science and business professional in order to do that. And I think striking that balance is very hard. So anyway, all I have to say, I think that these workshops or these conferences are very helpful in that, and that this was very much directed at helping scientists and inventors turn their ideas into viable commercial products, again, whether that be new drugs or med devices. And I think that there's a couple of ways that this anchors back to Scholar AI. Number one, we service a lot of scientists. We service a lot of inventors, and the typical pathway through which those ideas become reality or become products in the real world is through the patent process, and then later on through the FDA. process, right? And so we are kind of working on some tools right now that hopefully are going to help scientists turn their ideas into patents, turn their ideas into commercial products, and kind of beyond. And so I'll pause there for any kind of specific questions or thoughts to that. But just in summary, I do think it's incumbent upon us as people who care about scientific inventions to help more scientific ideas get into the real world. And so any way that we can do that, I think, is a benefit to the people that we're serving.
I'll just add to that, we want your feedback as users of Scholar AI and scientists, inventors in general. We want to know what tools and systems would help you be more successful. Ultimately, we exist to make you more successful. That's our goal. That's why we're doing our project. And so we want your feedback, your advice on how we can build things that would help accelerate your career. So that's a net win for us. It's a net win for you. And by accelerating science, we create a net win for society at large. So that's why we're doing what we're doing.
I think building on that, I see a lot of people get caught up in the translation between the basic science and actual product. And the reasons for it are multifaceted, but the primary reason is because a lot of the experiments that are rewarded on the academic side are not necessarily the experiments that translate directly to regulatory approval or even consistency of use, right? There's a lot of, there's a gulf between proof of concept and reliability and reproducibility. And that reliability and reproducibility is what you ultimately have to get a kind of quote unquote product to market. And I think that's where a lot of scientists stop, and for good reason. And so I do think there's a lot of opportunity for us to help people more effectively navigate those things and then help people's ideas get out into the world a little more effectively and efficiently. So all really good stuff there. But okay. Switching gears. One more time, Lakshay, why don't you tell us a little bit about how we've been able to kind of work with GPT-4 Omni in the Copilot, if we've tried it out at all, what users can expect as far as when they might be able to sandbox or play around with that tool. And also, we've got some kind of changes coming to the GPT. Maybe GPT is becoming free. So why don't you just speak a little bit on kind of what people can expect from Scholar AI in the next, let's call it 2 months.
Yeah, so I guess we can kind of start with what this past week, we changed pricing. The kind of intent behind a lot of that change is, for right now, a lot of our pricing structure has been subscription based. It's very familiar to consumer. You just kind of say, you're paying this much a month, you get access to something in some unlimited capacity. As we kind of talked about like multiple times, like compute is expensive. And so one thing that we're kind of experimenting with is we're taking kind of like a currency almost kind of model where if you're subscribed with us, what you get is almost an allowance, right? We have users who use this in a lot of different ways. We have users who use this just to read papers. We have users who use this just like generate tables out of all the papers they're reading. We have users who simply just want to search us and they just happen to like the way we output stuff, right? And so one thing that we're kind of doing with the pricing structure is that in changing the pricing structure to server currency, you're basically paying for whatever compute you're using effectively, right? If you are someone who just searches, you're not paying the same amount as someone who's using the Copilot and blasting it like 600 times a day, right? I think what that is allowing us to do, especially going forward, is we can kind of give optionality to the models that you're using under the hood. We're kind of teasing out building more agentic systems. So for those who aren't aware, the idea of like an agentic system is one where if you talk to the GPT, that is quote unquote an agent, right? You have an input output loop with this machine that is able to take actions and execute changes in some space, right? In an agentic system, you have multiple of those and they talk to each other rather than just you. And that way you can get really deep work products. We've seen people try to generate full on papers, equivalent sort of things using agents, right? By having this pricing structure kind of in place, that gives us the room to build agentic structures for the people who want to try to use agents, right? For whatever purpose you have. And also use the models that you find are effective for your use case, right? So what users kind of come to expect coming soon is a little bit more optionality inside of the Copilot specifically, between using 3.5. If you want like a really lightweight model, if you want to be able to send a lot more messages and mostly just have something to bounce ideas off of while still being able to call Scholar AI, great. If you want Omni, probably going to be a little bit lower, just like high level reasoning quality than what Turbo can do, but cheaper and also in that way more effective for images, video, that sort of thing. And Turbo, of course, is just kind of like what would probably be closest to the premium experience of, I want this model to understand science at a high level, to understand the paper at a high level, explain it to me very, very deeply, that sort of thing. I think with the GPT becoming free, so ChatGPT 4o has made GPTs available to anyone on the free plan. From what I understand, it's only 10 messages a day for now. OpenAI historically bumps those limits for users. They go up over time. I think we'll kind of continue to be reactive and experimental with regards to how that pricing works. I mean, as always, our GPT has a pretty free tier that most people only ever stay on, and that's great. So we'll continue to kind of experiment with like what are the tools and like products that begin to become available, especially now that we see, hey, all of a sudden ChatGPT is integrated with Google Drive and OneDrive. Can we make it easier for your content that you've been working with us on to end up in there, right? There's lots of room to experiment. And kind of, as I guess, OpenAI, it begins experimental like with consumer space. That also kind of leads to questions for us. In regards to like, where do we interplay? Where do we do unique stuff? Where do we choose to let OpenAI take the lead? Which is, of course, I imagine is the same question for a lot of startups ourselves.
I think that's right. I think rounding that out, what users can kind of expect, especially in the Copilot, and then as a transition in the GPT as well, is increased functionality, increased customization, and being able to use the tool in the ways that they want to use the tool. Right. So for some people, we are kind of an all-in-one stop. For some people, we are a single piece in a highly modular system, and we want to give users the ability to kind of create the tool that they would like to use. And so giving them more options, both at the surface level in the UI, and then also under the hood is going to be, I think, really powerful for getting those users to be able to use us in a very effective way. Okay, great. Well, everybody be on the lookout for the upcoming feature releases over the next few weeks and months. And thank you all for joining us. We will see you all next week at the same time. Make sure to check us out on all the typical podcast locations and on YouTube at the Scholar AI YouTube channel. See you all next time.